Shido is a wimpy loser who can't bag a girlfriend because he goons to Anagoon every night. However, everything changes when overpowered baddies from another dimension try to destroy the planet, so he has to rizz them up and crack them to seal their powers.
Yeah, boy.
This story started 30 years ago, when a phenomenon known as a spacequake devastated the country of Eurasia, claiming over 150 million lives. Afterwards, surviving nations built complex bunker systems so civilians could always evacuate safely before a spacequake strikes.
This is good, bro. This is good. But why not put this energy into a job or something?
In the present, Shido's hot sister Kotori wakes him up by bouncing on his glizzy. She refuses to stop messing around. And Shido is tired of his lightsaber being crushed, so he claims to have the tickle virus to scare her off. After breakfast, Kotori begs him to have lunch together at a diner, and after Shido agrees, she makes him promise to come even if the world is ending. While he agrees and waves her goodbye, 3 girls in his school gossip about their creepy relationship. Then, one of Shido's classmates named Hiroto shows up and expresses how happy he is that they get to start the new term together. Much later, in class, Hiroto continues gushing over Shido, saying that being in the same class must be a sign from Cupid that they are destined for each other.
But I'm not gay. You are. You are gay.
Just then, a girl named Tabichi walks in and calls Shido like they know each other, but he has no idea who she is. She is a little surprised by this, but sits down like it doesn't matter while Hiroto explains that she is the smartest and most popular girl in school. Hours later, it's finally time for lunch, so Hiroto tries to hang out with Shido again, but he tells the zesty creep to save it for later because he already has plans. The next moment, a siren goes off and the entire school is alerted of an impending space quake. In seconds, everyone in school and the surrounding areas rush into the special bunkers. However, after following everyone inside, Shido gets worried because he can't reach Kotori. So he checks her phone's location and panics because she is still at the restaurant they spoke about earlier. Before the bunker is shut, he runs out and desperately tries to find her, but then the space quake erupts, destroying everything in sight. Shido manages to get back up, but then he sees a mysterious girl in a battle suit right in the middle of the explosion. She also spots him and immediately attacks, demanding to know if he also wants to unalive her. Before Shido can respond, she gets attacked by a squad of girls in battle suits and Tobichi is one of them. After he notices a sad expression on the strange girl's face, Tobichi attacks her again and their weapons trigger another explosion that knocks Shido out. Much later, he wakes up in an infirmary and sees a nurse named Reina who says he is in a facility called the Fraxinus and assures him that Kotori is fine. However, Shido is still confused about everything, so Reina takes him to meet Kaohei, the vice commander of Fraxinus, but the real shock sets in when Shido spots Kotori, who is apparently the main commander. Moments later, she explains that the strange girl he saw is his spirit from another dimension, and her kind triggers space quakes anytime they crash into the planet. To stop them, a special anti-spirit team was created, and their job is to unalive spirits anytime they show up. While Katori says they need his help to stop the spirits, Shido is still struggling to believe that she is the same sister who was acting all cute and innocent this morning. When Kotori asks why he was even outside, he gets pissed and says her phone was still at the restaurant after the sirens went off. Kotori then makes the ship translucent before explaining that they are currently hovering above the diner. The next day, in a dream, Tobichi is taken back to the day a space quake separated her from her parents. By the time she finally managed to find them, a second quake finished the job. Meanwhile, Shido is currently with Reina, who then cups his face like she wants a sloppy smooch. Shido prepares himself, thinking it's time to lose his V-card, but she just fits a transmitter in his ear and sits before Kotori shows up and tells her clueless brother to snap out of it because they have to start his training.
Oh my god, bro.
Minutes later, Shido is face-to-face with Tame, his hot homeroom teacher, but he has no idea what to say to her, so Kotori tells him to stop being a wuss. She explains that he needs to make the spirits fall in love with him, but that will never work if he can't rizz up some average shoddy. Shido is still a bit scared, so Kotori decides to help him with a simple pickup line. He starts by complimenting her outfit, but when Tame thanks him, his brain goes into overdrive and he starts complimenting everything he sees on her body. Naturally, she gets creeped out and says she has to leave, so Kotori tells Shido to say exactly what she tells him. The next moment, Shido tells Tame that she is the reason he fell in love with school, which surprises her. He also boldly claims to love her, and when Tame tries to turn him down, he insists that he is serious about it. The next moment, Tame loses her marbles and starts yapping about marriage plans, so Shido apologizes for saying too much and runs off. Then, he bumps into Tobichi and gets an eyeful of her kitty before Kotori tells him to rizz her up. Shido tries to talk his way out of it, but Kotori insists that it's the closest he will get to his spirit since they are of similar age. She tells him to start with a compliment, so Shido tells Tabichi that her uniform looks good. Surprisingly, this works on the hot genius because she starts giving Shido compliments as well. This makes Shido feel a little confident, so he asks her out on a date, and she immediately agrees, which shocks him. After he explains what a date is, Tabichi still says yes and gives him a picture of her in uniform since he likes it so much. Just then, a siren goes off across campus because another space quake is about to happen, and it's the same spirit as before. Tabichi immediately runs off to her unit and suits up for the fight, but after the space quake destroys half of the school's buildings, her unit is forced to wait. This is because the spirit is inside one of the classrooms and they are not trained for close combat. Just then, Kotori calls Shido and tells him to go riz up the spirit because he has the perfect opportunity to speak to her. Shido second guesses himself, but Kotori assures him that it will work because she has an entire team of love experts ready to give him the best pickup lines. Moments later, Shido enters the classroom, but the spirit immediately attacks and demands to know who he is. Kotori's team then tells him to ask for her name instead so she won't think he is a simp, but when he does, she attacks again. She then gives Shido one last chance to talk, so he says his name and reminds her that they met the other day when she destroyed half the city. Happy, she then grabs his head and calls him a liar because he claimed that he didn't want to unalive her, but she always gets attacked by humans. Shido insists that not everyone wants her dead, so she asks why he came to see her. Kotori suggests being direct, so Shido admits that he wants to crack and almost gets his head chopped off. At this point, she's already tired of his nonsense, but the look on her face makes Shido upset, so he says he just wants to talk to her. Kotori quickly tells Shido to stick to the script, but he ignores her and tells the spirit that he will never reject her. She gets surprised by this and makes him promise on his life that he will never reject her. However, even after the promise, she refuses to fully trust him but says they can talk since she also has a lot to learn about this world. Shido then asks for her name, but she doesn't have one. So Kotori and her team scramble for ideas and eventually settle for Tome. However, when Shido tells her, she tries to incinerate him, so he decides to go with Toka instead. Thankfully, she accepts the name, so he teaches her to write it. All of a sudden, Tabichi's squad starts firing on Toka without realizing that Shido is right there. Taka's shield stops the attack, but when she tells Shido to leave, he refuses and insists on talking to her. After Taka sits with him, he asks what she is, but she has no idea. All she remembers is waking up with her powers and getting yeeted into this planet, where Tabichi's squad was already waiting with weapons drawn. Just then, Kotori tells Shido to pop the question, but he panics, which makes Taka question his intentions. As she tries to blow him up, he asks her out on a date, but she has no idea what that means. Before he can explain, Tabichi's squad finally notices that he is inside, so they stop firing. However, Tabichi thinks he is in danger, so she charges in with a plasma sword to defend him. Her superior tells her to leave, but she refuses, so Toka summons her sword and destroys the entire classroom with one strike. Much later, Tabichi's superior warns that she will end up dead if she doesn't stop being reckless. The next day, Shido returns to the destroyed school building and wonders if he will ever see Toka again, but she shows up right then and reminds him about the date. He gets nervous and says she has to change into regular people clothes before giving her Tabichi's picture. Toka gets a little jealous that he has another chick's photo, but then she uses her powers to create a similar uniform and gets excited for the date. Minutes later, Shido buys Toka some bread, and after taking the first bite, she loses it and asks if it's a date. Shido then tries to explain what a date actually is, but then she notices a sausage stand nearby and runs over to stuff her face. Then, she gets shocked to see so many people outside and prepares to attack, thinking that they are out to get her. But Shido explains that not everyone wants to murk her. Moments later, she is still gobbling down a couple of glizzies when she sees a little boy getting head rubs from his mum. Taka immediately throws the sausage sticks away and makes Shido run her head as well. Then, she runs off to find more treats while Tabichi spots her and calls Mission Control to ask for an observation device. Minutes later, Taka is still munching, but then Shido asks where she went after the attack yesterday. Taka then explains how she goes to another world where she immediately falls asleep. Happy when Shido asks how she gets to Earth, she explains how she gets drawn to it at random intervals beyond her control. This makes Shido realize that she has no control over the space quakes, but when he asks how she came without causing an explosion today, Toka gets frustrated by the questions and decides to find more treats. As Shido follows her and explains that they need to find a way to stop the space quakes, Tabichi uses the observation device, which shows her that Taka is the same spirit she fought yesterday. She immediately tries to attack, but her superior tells her not to move a muscle. By then, Taka has just found a new restaurant to explore, but Shido stops her because he has already spent his life savings. The next moment, Hiroto shows up and calls him sneaky for running around with a baddie. However, instead of being jealous, he gives Shido a fat stack of cash so he can go all out with Toka, who has already entered the restaurant. Once inside, Shiz gets surprised to see Reina, who then says that they all know about his secret date with Toka. The moment Shido joins her at the table, Kotori shows up to serve them and smacks Shido with a tray so he won't expose her. As Toka struggles with the menu, Kotori tells her not to worry and serves an entire buffet so she can try everything. While she stuffs her face, Kotori tells Shido to take her to a particular part of town, but Shido is confused because there are only a bunch of boring houses left after the space quakes. While Kotori assures him that they are doing everything to make his date perfect, an entire neighborhood gets converted into a romantic theme park for the date. Minutes later, they finally leave the restaurant, and Shido takes Taka towards the neighborhood Kotori mentioned, only to get the shock of a lifetime when he sees the insane transformation. As Taka runs in to feast on everything in sight, Reina tells Kotori that the anti-spirit team might make a move, but Kotori says it won't be a problem since she already made arrangements to keep them busy. Just then, Tabichi's observation device gets disconnected, but her superior tells her to meet up with the rest of the team so they can handle Toka together. Minutes later, Toka takes a break from stuffing her face to ask Shido if he is having fun as well, because he seems upset about something. Shido then admits that he is just being uptight and promises that he is enjoying their time together. This makes Taka excited again, so she takes him to a game stand and they win tickets to a theme park. However, after getting there and seeing that it's a hotel, Shido tells Taka to forget about it and drags her away before she can run in again. This makes Reina wonder if he has what it takes, but Kotori assures her that they just have to give Shido some time because he likes to take things slow. While all this is happening, Tabichi has just suited up to take Toka out for good. Minutes later, it starts raining, so Shido takes Taka into a nearby arcade, and she becomes obsessed with the games as expected. After falling in love with the crane game, Shido decides to help her win one of the stuffed plushies, but just as they get it to the hole, it gets stuck. Shido gives up because they are out of money again, but Taka starts begging the plushie to fall out and almost loses it. Thankfully, the plushie finally drops, so Shido takes her out to a trail by the woods. When Toka asks what a date is again, Shido finally explains it, without realizing that Tabichi and her superior Ryuko have been spying on them. As Ryuko wonders how Taka came back without triggering a spacequake, Tabichi loads up her rifle and waits for the order to shoot. Meanwhile, Taka has just realized why the anti-spirit team is so desperate to take her out. She admits that their date made her realize that this world is actually beautiful and her powers are only putting innocent people at risk. However, when she says they would all be better off without her, Shido stops her and says he will continue choosing her even if the rest of the world rejects her. He also tells her to stay with him for as long as she wants and promises to help her every step of the way. This makes Toka's heart flutter, but as she reaches for his hand, Tabichi shoots. Shido immediately jumps in to save Toka and gets his insides blasted out. While he lies on the floor bleeding out, Tabichi drops the rifle and gets overwhelmed by shock. Taka, on the other hand, loses her marbles and changes back to her suit before summoning her sword and cutting off an entire cliffside. Ryuko sees this and tells Tabichi to run, but she is paralyzed by guilt and Taka finally spots her. As Taka decides to finish her off, Katori tells the rest of the team that they can't take Taka out just yet because she is too valuable. Shocked, they remind her that her brother is on a one-way trip to heaven, but she tells them not to worry about Shido. Just then, he gets healed by some mysterious ability and wakes up confused. Meanwhile, Toka is currently giving Tabichi the beating of a lifetime, but just as she is about to put Little Miss Sharpshooter out of her misery, she hears Shido's voice and sees him in the sky, pissing his pants. Toka immediately catches him and says she needs to release her sword's power or it will cause another space quake. Just then, Kotori tells Shido to kiss her, so he tries to explain it gently to Taka, but she kisses him without hesitating. However, the kiss works a little too well because she ends up without any clothes while Shido desperately tries to look away. Days later, Shido is on his way home, trying to dodge the rain, when he sees a girl collapse. He quickly rushes over and helps her up, but she immediately scoots away from him and tells him to stay back. The next day, in class, Taka shows up with a bunch of freshly made cookies for him, but then Tabichi shows up as well. She apologizes to Shido for what happened and asks for his forgiveness, but Taka is already jealous and wants her gone. Tabichi then asks why she is even still here, but Taka ignores her and tells Shido to try her cookies. The next moment, Tabichi shows him the cookies she made and tells him to try them instead. Toka gets jealous again and quickly tries Tabichi's cookies to see if they are good. The amazing taste blows her away, but she lies that they are horrible and tells Shido to save himself the trouble of eating her sewer-grade cookies. When Tabichi insists him eating hers as well, Shido decides to take them both together, but that only makes them fight even more. Like that isn't enough, Hiroto also shows up with a box of cookies for his precious Shido, who is currently fed up with everything. Hours later, Shido is on his way home when he walks past a shrine and senses something close by. He eventually leaves, while the same girl from before hides behind a tree. Then, when he gets back home, he tries to take a shower and gets shocked when he sees Toka's perfect buns in the shower. Happy, after she gets scared and knocks him out, he heads to the living room and asks Kotori why she is in their house. However, Reina answers, explaining that after the last incident, where he sealed her powers with a kiss, they developed a special bond. They now have to keep them close to each other to make sure Toka never goes berserk again. Shido is still confused about why he has to be close to her, so Kotori explains that his kiss didn't just seal her powers away, he actually absorbed them. Also, that was the first time Toka was ever fully stable, so they can't risk her being unsupervised. When Shido asks how he got this ability, Kotori says she has no idea. So Reine takes over and once again explains that this is the only way to make sure Toka doesn't destroy an entire city again. Kotori then tells Shido to think of it as extra training, but he gets confused again and asks why he needs more training if Toka's powers have already been sealed away. They explain that Taka is just the first spirit they managed to get under control. There are a lot more out there, and they need him to keep rizzing them up like prime Johnny Sins. Shido gets frustrated by all this and says he is not ready to become some harem lord, but Taka hears this and apologizes for being a nuisance to him. Much later, Shido is still trying to wrap his head around everything when Kotori asks him to change the light bulb in the bathroom. He reluctantly grabs a new bulb and keeps muttering about how bossy she is until he gets to the bathroom and sees Toka inside again. After she knocks him out again, Kotori shows up and says he always has to be prepared for situations like these if he is going to become a harem lord. Then, he apologizes to Toka and returns the toilet paper she used to give him a concussion. Hours later, Kotori tells Shido to go take a bath since she already kept it all warm for him. But after recalling all the traps she set today, he tells her to go instead and pulls out her favorite bubble bath. As Kotori starts regretting her decision to be nice for once, Toka walks out, causing Shido to realize that it wasn't a trap this time. Minutes later, he is in the bath, finally trying to enjoy some alone time and wondering how he is going to handle more overpowered baddies like Toka. Then, he sees her getting ready for a bath and immediately dives into the water, while cursing Kotori for tricking him again. After Toka dives in, he comes up for air and regrets it immediately as she forces him back under. The following day, during lunch, Toka pulls her table to Shido's so they can eat together, but Tobichi has the same idea. Before they start arguing, Shido suggests eating together, only to regret it when Tobichi sees that they both have the same exact lunch. Shido quickly says they happen to run into each other while buying food, but Tobichi isn't falling for it because she knows the day he bought the food box and how long he has been using it. When Shido asks how she knows so much, she tells him to answer her question first, but then Taka gets jealous because they are leaving her out of the conversation. The next moment, a warning siren goes off, and everyone is told to evacuate because a space quake is about to happen. Moments later, everyone is about to enter the underground shelter, but then Reine tells Shido to leave Toka behind because she might become stressed if she sees Tobichi's team fighting this new spirit. Happy, thankfully, Tame shows up to get them all inside, so Shido asks her to look after Toka, who then asks why he is not taking shelter. After assuring her that he will be fine, he leaves with Reine. Minutes later, they are in the Fraxinus, where Kotori is closely monitoring the space quake. She explains that it's a lot smaller this time, and it's probably because the new spirit is a bit more stable than Toka. The moment they get a close-up on her, Shido recognizes her and tells them about the day he helped her up. The next moment, Tobichi's team attacks, and Shido gets pissed that they are trying to unalive a clearly confused girl, but Kotori tells him to stop thinking of spirits like regular people. Despite this, Shido remains upset and decides to go save her. Minutes later, Shido is inside an abandoned mall, asking Kotori and Reina if she will really show up. After assuring him that it's only a matter of time, Kotori says the anti-spirit team shouldn't be a problem since they hate being in closed spaces with spirits. Just then, the spirit girl's puppet asks if he is trying to get lucky with her plots like he did before. Shido panics, unsure of what to say, so Kotori's team of Riz Masters discusses options before giving him a suitable pickup line. It works, because the puppet starts laughing hysterically, so Shido musters enough courage to ask for her name. It introduces itself as Yoshino, but he gets confused and asks if the name belongs to her or the puppet. Just then, Kotori tells Shido to stop saying nonsense and focus on making her happy because she's about to lose it. After he apologizes, the puppet asks why he is even here, so Shido puts on his big boy pants and asks Yoshino to go out with him. While this is happening, Kane is explaining how dangerous space quakes can be to Toka, which makes her worried because Shido shouldn't be outside on his own. The gossip queens hear this and wonder why Toka doesn't know about the quakes, but then they all realize that she has left. Around the same time, Tobichi is with Ryuko, who assures her that Yoshino won't be a problem because she is less dangerous than Taka. Speaking of which, she also admits that she was shocked when a girl who looks exactly like Taka joined their school as a transfer student. All her research only showed that Toka was a seemingly normal girl who just showed up from nowhere, but Tobichi stays quiet about it. By then, Yoshino is playing on a dangerous setup, so Shido tells her to stop, but then she trips. He manages to catch her, but they accidentally kiss. After she gets back up, Katori tells him to run because Toka just showed up, and she doesn't look happy to see him. Shido gets confused and wonders why until he realizes that she saw the kiss and tries to explain. Taka refuses to listen, and like that isn't enough, the puppet starts making fun of her, saying that Shido probably got tired of her and wanted something better. This infuriates Toka, so she pulls the puppet away from Yoshino and starts threatening it while Yoshino begs her to give it back. Even Shido asks her to stop, but she continues strangling it until Yoshino summons a monster puppet from hell. Kotori warns Shido to run, but it's already too late as the puppet freezes the entire floor and starts shooting icicles. After it jumps out of the building with Yoshino, Tobichi, and Ryuko attack, but it releases an icy fog and escapes. By then, Shido has just gotten back up, but when he tries to talk to Taka, she pushes him away and accuses him of cheating. Happy the next day, Shido is back home, trying to talk to Taka, but she tells him to stay away, so he heads out. Hours later, Reine takes her to a restaurant and asks if she is upset about Shido's kiss with Yoshino. When Toka asks why she is always bringing up Shido, Reine asks if something else is upsetting her. She then admits to being confused because she has no idea why Shido triggers her emotions strongly. Around the same time, Shido runs into Yoshi, digging around some scraps. He tries to talk, but she takes off, so he promises that he doesn't mean any harm. When he asks if she is looking for the puppet, she runs into his arms and nods. Minutes later, he calls Kotori and asks her to review the footage from yesterday. Then, he gives Yoshino the umbrella, and she thanks him for the help. By then, Toka has just said she has no control over who Shido kisses, but what the puppet said really pissed her off. Reina then explains that the kiss was really an accident, and it doesn't mean that he doesn't care about her. After she reminds Toka that he risked his life to protect her, Toka realizes that she was wrong. Meanwhile, Shido has just heard Yoshino's belly growling, so he asks if she wants some food. While she gets embarrassed, Katori suggests taking her to a restaurant so they can talk, but they are all closed, so Shido decides to take her back home. Minutes later, Shido starts making some food and asks why the puppet is so important to her. Yoshino then says that Yoshinan is basically her role model because he is extremely confident. She has always depended on him since she is always scared and weak, but Shido stops her and says she is actually pretty strong. This makes Yoshino blush, and she tells him that no one has ever complimented her like that before. Shido then asks why she didn't fight back when Tobichi attacked, and she explains that her constant fear makes it hard for her to attack anyone. She also hates being alone and doesn't want to spread her pain, which is why she depends on Yoshinan and sees him as her hero. Upon hearing this, Shido rubs her head and promises to be her hero while they search for Yoshino. He also apologizes for kissing her, but Yoshino doesn't know what a kiss is. As Shido leans in and explains it, Toka walks in, trying to apologize for earlier. But seeing him so close to Yoshino makes her mad again. After Yoshino dips, Taka storms out right before Katori calls Shido and tells him that they found Yoshino. Minutes later, Shido shows up at Tobichi's place and gets shocked to see her dressed like a maid. After taking him inside, she serves a cup of tea, but the poisonous fumes spewing out terrify him. However, she gives him no choice, so he takes a sip and immediately sees the light. The next moment, she sits on his pickle and refuses to get up unless he agrees to use her first name going forward. He agrees, so she gets up and decides to take a shower. Using that opportunity, Shido spends the following minutes searching until he finds Yoshinan. Meanwhile, Kotori is getting frustrated because they lost contact with Shido the moment he entered Tobichi's apartment complex. Moments later, Tobichi finally comes out, but she is only dressed in a towel. Like that isn't enough, she sits right beside Shido, but he scoots away immediately. Then she asks what he is because there is no way he easily survived a bullet that obliterated half his body. Shido then asks if she has ever spoken to one of the spirits, but Tobichi says she is not interested in conversations with them. Shido further explains how good Toka and Yoshino are, and asks her to try talking before attacking any spirit because they can't all be bad. After she says that they still pose a great threat, Mission Control sends her a space quick alert. So she gets up to leave, but he stops her one more time and asks if she will still attack a spirit after they lose their powers. Tobichi says she doesn't want to do that, but with no time to waste, she heads out and joins Ryuko to fight Yoshino. As they surround her, she summons her angel again, but this time, it is the same size as Godzilla. In an instant, an entire neighborhood gets frozen, so Shido runs up to a nearby rooftop and tries to show Yoshino that he found the puppet. However, the brutal attacks make it impossible for Yoshino to listen. To make matters worse, her angel turns its focus on him, but then Toka shows up and summons her sword right on time to defend him. She then joins him on the roof and asks if Yoshino is more important than her. After Shido finally explains that he just wants to save her, Toka realizes that he isn't some low-budget ditty and decides to help. By then, Tobichi has just used her force field to launch an entire building at Yoshino, but Toka stops her, so Tobichi starts fighting her instead. As the entire unit focuses on Taka, Shido starts walking into Yoshino's blizzard and ignores Kotori's warning that his fast recovery won't save him this time. She also explains that the spirit force granting his powers will make him a target to Yoshino's angel, but he still ignores her. Moments later, he gets close enough for Yoshino to see him and collapses. After seeing Yoshinon in his hands, she tears up and thanks him. But the blizzard is still raging, so Shido says they have to kiss to stop it. Without thinking twice, Yoshino kisses him, and her powers finally get sealed, but she ends up exposed. Days later, Shido calls Kotori to ask for a trip to the Tengu Hot Springs because Toka and Yoshino keep asking for it. After she agrees and says they don't really have a choice, Kyohei offers to fill in for her so she can join them, but Kotori refuses. When he insists that she needs a break, Kyohei asks for the real reason he wants her to go. He then admits that he was planning to flood the hot spring with drones to get every angle of her perfect kitty. Kotori immediately summons guards to chop off his glizzy, but after Kyohei desperately begs for forgiveness,
Say wallahi, bro. Say wallahi.
she sends him to dig at a faraway site for a whole week as punishment. While Kotori rethinks her decision to go on the trip with Shido, Ryuko gets summoned by her superior, who then explains how useless she is and says her unit will be getting reinforcements. Minutes later, Ryuko starts taking her frustration out on a bunch of papers when one of the girls shows up to tell her that their usual trip has been cancelled. Ryuko completely loses it, but then the girls explain that they are all planning a trip to the Tengu Hot Springs and she is invited. Her mood immediately flips, but just a few minutes later, they all get suited up for the trip, but Tobichi says they should all be training, not trying to have fun. The next moment, Shido calls to ask if he can hold on to a book he borrowed from her. After Tobichi agrees, she hears Yoshino in the background yapping about the trip to the hot spring and crushes her soda in anger. Happy. By then, Shido is in a car with Reine and the girls heading to the hot spring. When Yoshino gets super excited to be in a car, he realizes that it's her first time and rubs her head. Naturally, Taka gets jealous and asks for head rubs as well, but Shido can't reach, which makes her upset. He then reminds her that she chose to sit in front, but as he keeps talking to Yoshino, Taka gets pissed and starts stomping until she kicks right through the car and destroys the bridge. Moments later, Ryuko's train stops in its tracks because of the crash and the sirens start blaring, so she tells the girls to get ready for a long hike to the hot spring. Minutes later, Shido and the girls are walking, but Toka suddenly stops and apologizes for ruining the trip. She thinks Shido is upset, but he rubs her head and says it's nothing to worry about, which makes her excited again. Just then, the rest of the team aboard the Fraxinus spot Ryuko's team getting close to Shido and the girls, so they try to figure out their next move since both Kotori and Kyohei left a while ago. After arguing for a bit and casting a vote, they agree to channel all their resources to protecting Shido and the girls from Ryuko's squad. As a result, Ryuko and her girls spend the following few minutes walking in circles and finding insane obstacles every step of the way. Eventually, Ryuko gets fed up and sends Tobichi to find a clear path. After she does, Shido and the girls run into Kotori in a random stall. When he asks why she is there, Kotori claims she was just watching over them, but Shido can tell that she wants to go on the trip as well, so he invites her to join. Kotori then acts like they are the ones forcing her, but then she gets a call from the ship, explaining the situation with Ryuko's team. After she gives the order to get rid of them, Ryuko's team run into a solid steel wall blocking the path Tobichi just found. This time, Ryuko gets frustrated and plants an explosive device before blowing up the wall. Kotori also gets fed up with them, so she sends a missile to nuke them. But instead of their insides getting torn apart, they get trapped with glue and nets. The next moment, the entire neighborhood converts to a booby trap festival, made just to stop them. After minutes of getting knocked out and berated with attacks, Ryuko realizes that they are dealing with professionals, so she tells the others to use any means necessary to stop the attacks. Minutes later, they destroy all of Kotori's booby traps, and while she gets frustrated, a missile lands right on Shido and the girls. The blast sends Yoshino flying, and Yoshino starts crying, which activates her powers. Thankfully, Shido promises to find him, and this makes her relax for a bit while he heads out. By then, Kotori has just realized that they can't win by playing nice, so she tells the rest of the crew to use any means necessary to stop Ryuko's team. The next moment, they get attacked with food and everything in sight, but while the other girls get dropped, Ryuko goes all out and stays on her feet. However, the constant fighting makes her go insane, and after recalling how the Major always complains about her efforts, she orders everyone to empty their clips on the enemy attacks even if they pass out while doing it. Minutes later, Shido gets close to them and is shocked to see all the explosions, but then he finally finds Yoshino. Just then, one of Kotori's veggie bombs gets deployed right above him, so she tries to cancel, but it's too late. Thankfully, Toka saves him from the blast, but Tobichi and some of the other girls spot her. Tobichi tries to attack, but Toka leaves immediately. Much later, Shido and the girls finally make it to the hot spring, but after Yoshinon's head accidentally drops in the water, Yoshino loses it and unleashes her powers, which freezes Ryuko's girls as they try to enjoy the warm water. However, Kaiohei calls Kotori to tell her that he found a hot spring while digging at the site, so they all go there instead. Days later, in a mock battle, Tobichi gets dominated by a new lieutenant called Mana. Afterwards, Ryuko introduces her in class and decides to pull up footage from their last fight with Yoshino for some training. While she explains a new battle strategy, Mana sits beside Tobichi, who then asks how she became the first recruit to unalive a spirit. After Mana says it's actually a lot to unpack, she sees Shido in the footage and calls him Onishin, which surprises Tobichi. After the lesson, Tobichi meets her in the hallway and demands to know how she knows Shido. However, the way she says his name makes Mana realize that she also knows him, so she asks how, and Tobichi claims she is his lover. The next day, in class, Tame says there is a new transfer student, which surprises Shido since Toka just joined weeks ago. The next moment, a chick named Kurumi walks in and introduces herself as a spirit, but they all think it's a joke. She then asks if someone can show her around campus, but when Hiruto offers to be her tour guide, she shuts him down hard and asks Shido instead. While all this is happening, Ryoko wonders what kind of student jokes about being a spirit. The next moment, Mana shows up and says Kurumi is a real spirit who has single-handedly unalived over 10,000 people, the definition of an evil spirit. Minutes later, Kotori calls Shido and tells him that Kurumi is a real spirit, but since they barely know anything about her, she tells him to riz her up as well. Then, Kurumi shows up for the tour, so Shido decides to start by showing her the cafeteria, while Tobichi and Taka watch with envy. Moments later, they arrive at the cafeteria, so Shido tells Kurumi the best thing to eat, but she suddenly gets up in his face and says he is very handsome. He backs up and starts blushing, so Kotori reminds Shido that he is meant to be the player here, not the other way around. As for his next question, she asks the others on the ship for ideas, so Kaiohei suggests making him ask about her kitty covers and immediately gets carried away by guards. However, Shido heard the suggestion and foolishly asked Kurumi for her kitty covers without thinking. Katori immediately tells him to abandon mission, thinking he failed, but Kurumi decides to show it to him.
Yeah, boy.
However, after she climbs the steps and starts pulling up her skirt, Shido gets embarrassed and tells her to stop. After she teases him for being shy, Shido asks what she meant when she said she is his spirit. Kurumi then tells him to stop playing dumb because she knows all about him. Shido immediately demands to know how, but she refuses to go into detail and only admits that she has been in love with him ever since she first heard about him. She then takes his hand and says she has a favor to ask of him, but then Tobichi and Toka fall out of their hiding spot. Tobichi then asks why they are holding hands in school, and after Kurumi claims that Shido was only supporting her, Tobichi and Toka act like they suddenly feel weak to get his attention. Happy. Just then, the gossip queens spot them and call Shido a shameless player for already holding hands with the new girl. Much later, Kurumi thanks him for the tour and leans closer to say that she wanted to be alone with him. After she leaves, Shido asks Toka where Tobichi is, and she tells him that she suddenly left a while ago. Minutes later, a random thug bumps into Kurumi and fakes an apology before two of his boys surround her and say that she needs to repay them with a good time. Surprisingly, she agrees without putting up a fight, but says that they need to do it in private. So they decide to head back into the alleyway. However, just a couple minutes later, the alley gets painted with their blood as Kurumi feasts on their insides and enjoys it. The next moment, Mana shows up and says she missed all the fun, while Kurumi responds like she was already expecting her. Meanwhile, Shido is currently on his way back home with Taka when Mana suddenly shows up and calls him Nisan. Naturally, he gets surprised by this, but she insists that she is his younger sister, so they all head home together. Once inside, Yoshinon starts teasing Shido about having a sister that he didn't know about all this time. When Kotori says she is his real sister, Mana insists that she's also his sister and says this must mean that Kotori is also her older sibling, but Kotori is confused and says that Shido got adopted into her family a long time ago. Shido also wonders how Mana can be his sister if he doesn't remember her, so she shows them a picture they took together years ago. Still, Kotori insists that it might be someone else, but Mana insists that it's him because she still has some memories from back then. Despite this, Kotori insists that she is his real sister and says Mana can't take him away, but Mana says she only wants him to be happy, even if they are not together all the time. She also insists that she is closer to him, but this leads to an argument with Kotori. Eventually, Shido asks Mana about the people currently taking care of her, but she tells him not to worry about it and leaves before he can ask any more questions. The next day, in class, Tami notices that Kurumi is late, and when Shido also gets curious, Tabichi tells him not to worry because she won't be coming today. After Kurumi suddenly shows up, Kotori sends Shido a text, asking to meet up later. Hours later, they meet up in a private lab where Reina pulls up footage from yesterday when Mana and the rest of the anti-spirit team ambushed Kurumi. After telling him that Kurumi was actually unalived by Mana, they all wonder how she is still alive. Meanwhile, Tobichi just met up with Kurumi to ask the same question. The next moment, she gets held down by a bunch of astral arms and is forced to listen as Kurumi admits that she is obsessed with making Shido her next tasty meal. Much later, Shido asks Kurumi to spend some time together, and she immediately takes this as him finally asking her out on a date, so she agrees. After she leaves, Kotori assures Shido that this is the best course of action to learn more about her. When Shido reminds them of the risk of being with her, Kotori says it's nothing to worry about since Mana and Tobichi have probably already heard about Kurumi's resurrection. This makes Shido a bit more optimistic, so he agrees to go out with her. But then Tobichi hears this and asks what he is talking about. Shido says it's nothing, but Tobichi pins him to the wall and keeps demanding answers until he runs off to meet Toka. She then recalls how Kurumi also gobbled up her cookie and held herself back because she wanted to taste him first. Meanwhile, Taka is currently on her way home with Shido, and when he apologizes for ditching her during lunch, she says it's no problem, only to think back on how lonely she felt back then. After the gossip trio showed up and asked if she was okay, she explained that she just missed Shido, so they all decided to comfort her. After they get back to Shido's place, he asks when she will be heading home, but she suddenly closes the curtains and starts revealing her glistening milkers. Shido panics and falls back on the couch, so she stuffs a map down her jugs and climbs the couch to get closer. However, instead of rubbing it in his face, she makes him take the map before saying that it's the direction to the date she wants to go on tomorrow. Before Shido can say no, she rushes out, leaving him with no choice but to accept. Just then, Tobichi calls Shido as well and schedules a date for tomorrow without giving him the chance to respond. The next day, Shido regrets that he didn't call them to cancel, but Kotori assures him that it will be successful since she has assembled the entire team to help him. For starters, he has to take Toka to the museum, so he waits at the spot they agreed on until she shows up looking hotter than ever before. After he compliments her, she gets embarrassed and decides to get the date started. Meanwhile, Kotori and the others keep an eye on Kurumi and Tobichi. Minutes later, Toka asks Shido what an aquarium is, which surprises him since she is the one who asked to see one. He then explains what it is, but she misunderstands and thinks it's a fish restaurant. Minutes later, they are finally about to start the aquarium tour, but Kotori tells Shido to make up an excuse and dip because it's time to see Kurumi. After she hangs up, Shido acts like his insides are burning up and tells Toka to go ahead while he runs out to find the men's room. Then, he quickly runs to a hidden spot, and the Fraxinus quickly teleports him to the spot he is supposed to meet Kurumi. He then runs up to her and apologizes for being late, but she tells him not to worry about it because she just got here. When she asks where he wants to go, the team up in the Fraxinus starts discussing Shido's options. Since he has been a little more daring with Kurumi, they decide to go with a lingerie shopping date. Shido immediately blurts it out loud and worries that she will call him a creep like Taka, but she easily agrees. As they head inside, Kiahe wonders if this will lead to Shido getting in trouble with the other girls, but Kotori says it's nothing to worry about since they are far away from each other. Minutes later, they get to the lingerie store, but Kurumi has no idea what to pick, so she asks Shido for help. Once again, the team decides to go with the spiciest set she found. After Shido chooses it, Kurumi gladly enters the dressing room to try it on. While Shido starts panicking because of the crowd of girls watching him, Mana goes through some top-secret procedure. Minutes later, Kurumi shows Shido her outfit, but before he can respond, the gossip queens show up and ask what he is doing here. Kotori then tells him to make a run for it, so he uses the same bellyache excuse and runs off, but the girls chase after him, happy. Luckily, he manages to lose them right before he meets up with Tobichi. Once again, he apologizes for taking so long, but she says it's okay since she just showed up. She then suggests going to the cinema, while Kotori worries that Taka will soon lose her patience. After entering the theater, Tobichi decides to get some food before the movie, so Shido takes the opportunity to ask why she wanted to go on a date with him in the first place. Tobichi then says she doesn't want him to be alone and proceeds to invite him to her place, which surprises him. Just then, Taka runs out of the aquarium to find Shido, and he spots her, so he uses the bellyache excuse to dip out on Tabichi. After catching up to Taka, she also decides to get something to eat. However, this break in the plan leads to Shido spending the rest of the day losing his mind as he keeps making excuses to keep all three of them satisfied with the date. Eventually, the gossip girls spot Shido with Kurumi again and try to intervene, but Yoshino intentionally trips right in front of them to create a distraction. Using this, Shido manages to slip away, but he still makes up another excuse to leave Kurumi. After Yoshino also gets tired of distracting the gossip girls and passes out, Rainy carries her away and thanks her for the help. Minutes later, Kurumi is on a bench, trying to contain the excitement she feels from what she plans to do with Shido. Then, she hears a group of worthless groupies using pebble guns to traumatize a cat, so she walks towards them and asks if she can join the fun. After they agree and give her the gun, she decides to change the rules, but the Fraxinus suddenly loses the camera they have been using to spy on her. While they try to figure out what just happened, Toka bumps into Tobichi and initially apologizes before realizing who she is and getting pissed. Naturally, they both try to brag about their date with Shido, but after they both argue over who is actually going out with him, Tobichi realizes that something fishy is going on, so she runs to learn the truth. By then, Shido has just returned to the bench where he left Kurumi, and after Kiaohei explains that they just detected a spirit's powers in the woods, he decides to go take a look. Moments later, Shido stumbles upon a pile of blood and body parts, which completely terrifies him. Before he can escape, Kurumi spots him and makes him watch as she blasts holes into the last wannabe thug for toying with another creature. She then turns to Shido, and when he tries to run, she holds him down and says she wanted to enjoy their date a bit more before using him as dessert. All of a sudden, she gets yeeted into a tree as Mana shows up to defend Shido. As Shido tries to understand why she has a suit similar to Tabichi's, Kurumi gets a little irritated that she interrupted her date with Shido. However, when she tries to attack, Mana releases a special plasma beam that traces Kurumi's movements until she gets smoked. As she lays there, bleeding out, Shido tells Mana not to unalive her. And this makes Kurumi feel warm inside, but it doesn't last long as the rest of her blood leaks out. Moments later, Shido gets back on his feet and asks Mana how she can unalive someone so easily, so she starts by saying that she is pretty much used to it. Also, unlike the regular spirits, Kurumi always comes back to life, which is why she basically follows her trail of blood and unalives her anytime she starts a murder spree. Happy. Despite this, Shido insists that she is doing the wrong thing and says he won't let her unalive Kurumi anymore. The next moment, Mana blasts him away, reminding him that he has no say in the matter. Several minutes later, Toka and Tabichi finally spot him, but when she notices a bruise on his hand and tries to take a closer look, Shido remembers all the blood from earlier and pulls his hand back. He then walks away, but after giving him a couple hours to think in silence, Toka shows up again and says they have to finish the date. Before Shido can argue, she drags him along to all her favorite food spots and says she is not mad because she heard all about Kurumi from Katori and the others. Much later, they get to a cliffside overlooking the city, and Shido says he still wants to save Kurumi, but she might be too far gone for redemption. Toka then says she is actually the same as Kurumi. The only difference is that he saved her before she became a blood-hungry spirit. She still believes he can do the same for Kurumi, so Shido decides to at least give it a shot. The next day, at school, Kurumi finds Shido at his locker and admits that she didn't expect him to show up after what happened. With a serious look, he then tells her about his decision to save her and stop Mana from attacking, but Kurumi sees this as wishful thinking and leaves. Much later, while classes are still ongoing, she heads up to the roof and starts casting a barrier all over campus. Meanwhile, Mana meets up with Katori and tells her to hand Shido over to her because she is clearly putting him in danger by sending him on missions to stop spirits without a proper weapon. She insists that she knows what's best for Shido, but Katori tells her to save the self-righteous yapping when she already works for a criminal organization. Mana gets surprised that she knows about the secret company funding her weapons, but Katori says it was easy to figure out since only 2 companies have ever created the anti-spirit suits they use in combat. Still, Mana insists that she is right and tells Kotori that the company practically saved her, but this makes Kotori realize that she doesn't know the whole truth. Days ago, Reina had scanned a sample from Mana and learned that her body was filled with excessive amounts of magical energy, which had depleted her life force to the point where she would only live for 10 more years. Around the same time, Shido calls Reina to talk about his new goal to save Kurumi, but her barrier suddenly knocks everyone out except him. Even Toka struggles to stay up. So Reina reminds Shido that he absorbed her powers, which means he is the only one strong enough to withstand the barrier. Just then, Kurumi takes over the speaker systems and asks Shido to come see her on the roof. Meanwhile, Tabichi suits up to fight, but she runs into Kurumi on the way there. While Shido eventually gets up to the roof to face her, Toka manages to activate enough power to get back up, but she also runs into Kurumi on her way to the roof. By then, Shido has just met up with Kurumi, who then explains that her castle of time skill basically replenishes her life force by draining years from her victims. Realizing the risk, Shido tells her to stop and take him instead, but she refuses and says he has to take back what he said about saving her. After revealing her true, psychotic nature, she says he should be terrified and accept the fact that she is beyond redemption. When Shido refuses and says he still wants to save her, she triggers a space quake warning and says all the students won't even get the chance to escape. However, Reina tells Shido that her emotional state points to the fact that she is a little scared. The next moment, Shido climbs the rails and says he will unalive himself if she doesn't stop, but Kurumi refuses to believe him, so he jumps. She quickly saves him, but he threatens to bite his tongue if she keeps resisting. Frustrated, Kurumi cancels the barrier, and Shido explains that she is still worth saving, even if she has to spend the rest of her life paying for her crimes. Kurumi starts to believe him and tries to take his hand, but an arm bursts through her spine, dropping her instantly. Kurumi's new version takes over, claiming to be even more cruel, but as she tries to feast on Shido, Mana chops her hand off. Kurumi gets impressed by this and decides to go all out by summoning her angel, the most powerful version of her time skill. With this, she turns Mana into a shooting target, blasting her with bullets from every direction until she passes out. Then, Tabichi and Taka show up to help, but Kurumi mocks them and summons every version of herself that has ever existed. After saying that this is why they can never really stop her, she creates a space quake to destroy everyone, but it gets cancelled out in an instant, which shocks everyone. As Kurumi demands to know what just happened, they hear a voice explaining that unleashing an equally powerful force at the same time as a space quake will stop it completely. Then, they look up and freeze in shock, as Katori reveals her powers to stop Kurumi for good. As soon as their duel begins, Kurumi realizes that Kotori has the upper hand, so she uses her time skill to freeze her in place and rains bullets on her while Shido watches in horror. After one last bullet to the head, she becomes ecstatic and expresses how disappointed she is that none of them are a good match for her. But then Kotori heals and gets back up. She then asks Kurumi if that is all she has in the tank, which makes her even more upset than before. This time, she tries to take Shido out first, and when Kotori jumps in to protect him, Kurumi takes the opportunity to hit her with yet another powerful attack. However, as she starts getting the upper hand again, Katori decides to stop playing around and transforms her battle axe into a massive cannon. Kurumi gets terrified by the magical power building up and uses her clones as a shield, but one blast still knocks her down to her knees and rips a hole through her angel. Upon seeing this, Katori decides to finish the job, but Shido begs her to stop and reminds her that their mission is to stop spirits without unaliving them. When she refuses to listen, he runs in front of Kurumi, but Kotori loses her senses to the rage and fires anyway. The next moment, Shido gets knocked out and dreams about a similar incident where he got dropped and had to watch as Kotori was helpless. Hours later, he wakes up in an infirmary and sees Yoshino, who then runs out to get Reine. Moments later, Reina shows up and explains that they brought him here after the fight because he passed out. After remembering what happened, Shido panics and asks what happened to the others, so Reina shoves his head into her jugs to calm him. She then explains that while Mana and Tobichi were taken to a special facility for treatment, Kurumi escaped and Taka insisted on staying by his side, despite being seriously wounded. Happy minutes later, she takes him to a private lab where Kotori is being monitored and tells him to be careful before he walks in. Kotori welcomes him like she always does, but Shido tells her to skip the chit-chat and explain what she is. She then asks if he would believe her if she claimed to still be a human, and Shido says he will always believe because of their bond as siblings. After getting a little emotional, Katori says that she suddenly got the powers of a spirit, but she can't remember how. When Shido suddenly says that he remembers, she gets confused, so he tells her about the dream he had earlier and how it made him recall the night she got her powers. However, the fact that she can't remember how she got the powers makes her wonder if someone sealed them away. Just then, Shido asks how she has been living like a regular human all this time, so Kotori reminds him that he sealed her powers just like he did with Toka and Yoshino. However, he doesn't remember since it was a long time ago. The next moment, she asks Shido to walk over to her, but as soon as he stands up, she drops him with a brutal liver shot and says he can easily lose his life, so he has to stop being so reckless. This makes him remember how she almost blew his brain out, and Kotori says that she could have actually done it because her powers make her lose control. She tries to explain more, but she suddenly gets weak, so he tries to help. After Reina says she needs rest, they both head outside and she explains that they only have 2 days to seal Kotori's powers or she will lose control forever. This completely ruins Shido's mood, and when Taka tries to talk to him, he declines and heads to the hospital where Mana and Tobichi are getting treated. After the nurse explains that no one is allowed to see them, Tobichi shows up and asks if Toka is okay, only to get pissed when Shido says yes. Then, they find a spot to sit, and she explains that Mana is being treated with top-secret tech, which is why no one is allowed to see her. As Shido gets up to leave, Tobichi intentionally drops and asks for help, but the clueless virgin decides to get a wheelchair, so she drags him back and asks him to carry her to the room. Minutes later, they get there, but she immediately asks him to peel an apple, so he can't escape. He agrees again, but refuses, when she asks him to feed her mouth to mouth. Left with no choice, Tobichi eats it from his hand and gives him a little taste of the Gawk 5000. Then, she makes him sit on the bed and climbs his woodpecker, claiming that it's the best way for him to check her temperature. Afterward, Shido finally gets up to leave, but she stops him and asks what happened during the fight, because she passed out just as a new spirit, controlling flames, showed up. After saying that he also passed out, Shido asks why the spirit is so important. So Tobichi explains how the spirit caused an explosion that unalived her parents years ago. While Shido realizes that this is the night he dreamt of, Tobichi says she has spent all this time training just so she can send that spirit back to its maker. Later that evening, Shido is still on a walk, thinking about that night and the fact that Kotori might be responsible for Tobichi's trauma. Around the same time, Ryuko shows up to the hospital to tell Tobichi about a new weapon that will be delivered to their base in 2 days so she can come check it out. By then, Shido has just returned to the Flaxinus where Reine and Kyohei explain that he will be going to a water park with Kotori for their date, so he has to practice until they get it right. The next day, he ends up back at the swimsuit store, but this time he's with Toka and Yoshino. When he asks why, Reine says they are the perfect test subjects for his date with Kotori. Since it's a water park date, he has to get used to seeing plot armor and hot baddies so he won't make Kotori jealous by staring at other girls. Just as he tries to get it over with, Tobichi shows up and spends a couple minutes teasing Toka before asking if she saw the flame spirit that showed up yesterday. When she refuses to talk, Tobichi starts begging, which creeps Toka out since Tobichi has never begged a day in her life. However, all Toka remembers is seeing the flames right before her light got cut off. With that settled, Tobichi decides to join their lingerie shopping spree, but Taka turns this into a battle to see who makes Shido blush the most. Toka goes first and makes the simp drool with her classic beauty, but Tobichi swoops in with something even more spicy to draw his attention. Pissed off, Toka turns up the heat with a skin-tight swimsuit, but then Tobichi walks out with a seemingly regular shirt. However, after getting close enough, she makes Shido take it off for her, revealing an insanely hot swimsuit that jumpstarts the python in his pants. Before Taka can react, they hear Yoshino asking for help, so Shido rushes in, only to find her spread out on the floor like every Gooner's fantasy girl. Much later, Shido is back on the ship, worrying about the date because it's tomorrow, and he is still not confident that it will succeed. As Kyohei tries to reassure him, he mentions struggling to remember what happened during the fire 5 years ago, so Kyohei suggests looking at old footage from that day. Minutes later, he plays it, and after getting to the frame where Kotori lost control, Shido notices that someone else was beside her, but when he tries to remember, his brain blows a fuse. The next day, Kyohei calls him to apologize for not being helpful, but Shido tells him not to worry about it. After Kyohei wishes him luck on the date with Kotori, she finally shows up and acts like she isn't excited about it. Shido also struggles to switch from rude brother to Riz Lord, so Reine sends Toka and Yoshino as well to ease the tension between them. Moments later, Kotori changes into her swimsuit and Shido gets surprised by how good she looks, but when she notices, he acts like it means nothing. Reina then reminds him that this is a date, so he compliments her, but Kotori says she already knows they are feeding him answers. Curious, she decides to play along and asks what he likes about the swimsuit. As always, everyone on the ship starts scrambling for answers, and Kyohei eventually decides to go with Kotori's growing melons. However, as soon as the words leave Shido's mouth, he realizes that he made a grave mistake. Minutes later, Toka suggests going on a slide, but Kotori refuses and Shido says it's too dangerous for Yoshino. However, when Taka decides to only take Shido, Kotori gets a little jealous and decides to go with them. Shido agrees, thinking it the perfect chance to break the ice. He ends up mashed like a sausage in between freshly baked buns. After they slide into the water, Kotori gets scared and clings onto him, but when he tries to check on her, she acts like it was nothing and tells him to get her ribbon. Happy then, as she puts it back on. Shido asks why she chose black, and Kotori explains that it's the only color that makes her feel strong. Minutes later, they get lunch, and Shido takes the opportunity to ask Reina if Kotori is warming up to him, but her emotional state is the same as always, which means he is doing a horrible job. When she suddenly heads to the ladies' room, Shido feels a little relieved, and the girls notice this, so they ask why he seems so tense around her. Shido gets surprised by this since he didn't notice, so he also heads inside and asks Reina for an analysis on his current emotional state. After she says it won't be possible, He spots her giving Kotori some meds in secret and quietly listens as Reine asks Kotori why she's putting herself through all this stress. Kotori then says she really wants to enjoy her last date with Shido because she might never be the same after today. After giving her the drugs, Reine spots Shido and makes him promise not to say a word about what he just saw because Kotori wouldn't want him to date her out of pity. Minutes later, Kotori returns and asks where the others are, but Shido tosses his transmitter and tells her to forget about everyone else so they can actually spend some time together. While he takes her to a fun spot, Ryoko shows Tobichi the secret weapon she mentioned the other day. When Tobichi asks if it can destroy the flame spirit, Ryoko tells her to forget about using it because the best mage in their entire company couldn't last 30 minutes with it. She also gets curious and asks if this is because she saw the video from the fight with Kurumi, but Tobichi didn't even know there was a video. Moments later, Ryuko pulls up the footage and Tobichi gets pissed when she sees that it was Kotori. Minutes later, Kotori is struggling to keep her food down while Shido is having the time of his life. As he continues taking her on every ride he can find, Reina realizes that she was worried for no reason. On the other hand, Kyohei is losing his senses as he fantasizes about Shido getting his nuts crushed by Kotori. Around the same time, Taka admits that it's nice to have fun without Shido and Kotori worrying about them, but then she decides to go find them. Yoshino stops her in. After explaining what she heard Shido and Reine discussing the other day, she tells Toka that they need to give Shido space to save her. Taka then says that she also wants to help Katori for all the times she saved her, but Yoshino insists that the best way to do that is by letting Shido do his thing. Much later, Shido and Kotori finally take a break, so he decides to pop the question. Kotori thinks it's time for the kiss and gets nervous, but Shido wants to ask about what happened 5 years ago. However, before he can say a word, a missile obliterates Kotori's side of the bench while Shido gets protected with a shield. After Tobichi tells him to get to safety, Kotori flies out with her powers released and says it won't be so easy to unalive her. She also calls Tobichi a nutjob for firing a missile with civilians around, but Tobichi immediately resumes her attack. Shido gets blasted away by the impact and even Taka notices the rumbling. But Yoshino stops her from leaving and reminds her that her powers are mostly sealed within Shido. Despite this, Toka says she has to help him, and after she runs off, Yoshino asks Yoshinan for permission before deciding to help as well. By then, Tobichi has just unleashed a barrage of missiles to nuke Kotori, but she easily survives the explosion with a smirk on her face. Tobichi then tries the attack again and uses a barrier to keep Katori in place, but it only burns her dress a bit. After commending her for using some top-grade weapons, Katori goes on the offense and Tobichi immediately tries to escape because the suit is draining her life, but Kotori catches up and continues attacking until she drops. As she struggles to get back up, Kotori powers up her cannon to end it all, but then Tobichi says she will still get revenge for what happened to her parents 5 years ago. Kotori gets shocked to hear this and stops, so Tobichi explains how she burned both her parents and gets back up to finish what she started. At this point, the guild has made Kotori accept her fate, but Shido returns and tells Tobichi not to pull the trigger because she will never be the same if she goes through with it. Despite this, Tobichi insists on getting her revenge, but as she tries to attack again, Toka and Yoshino stop her, buying Shido enough time to run with Kotori. While fighting, Taka tries to talk some sense into Tobichi's empty skull, but she refuses to listen to reason and continues blowing up everything in sight. By then, Shido has managed to wake Katori up, but they don't have much time to waste, so he admits that he always has and will always love her. Kotori gets emotional and admits it as well, so he kisses her and seals her power, but this also restores their memories. However, with Tobichi already closing in, he tries to run again, but her attacks knock him down. When Shido's wounds heal in seconds, Tobichi gets surprised and watches in shock as he tells her to shoot him because the flame spirit she wants to unalive is inside him. Tobichi becomes conflicted, but the rage from her traumatic past takes over, so she draws her weapon, ready to attack. Despite the danger, Shido continues pleading and explains that the spirit only used Kotori, but she refuses to believe him. Thankfully, her body finally reaches its limit, causing her to drop the weapons and collapse. While all this is happening, Kurumi is elsewhere, still using her powers to absorb more life and time. Later that day, Reine apologizes to Shido for making him go on the date with Kotori. He gets confused by this, so she explains that Kotori has always been in love with him, so he never needed the date to seal her powers. He could have done it after they first woke up 2 days ago, but the date was important to Kotori. The next moment, Kotori kicks him and says the analysis machine is bugging. She then says they need to make a report about the flame spirit and also find a way to store data safely in case their memories get wiped again. Before leaving, she asks Shido if he meant what he said before sealing her powers, so he admits to loving her again and gets another brutal kick to the chest. Later on, Ryuko gets the suit back and wonders how to permanently keep Tobichi away from it. Meanwhile, Toka asks Shido to stop kissing spirits anytime he tries to save them because it makes her feel bad. Instead of explaining why he has to do it, he decides to kiss her instead, but the entire crew, as well as Yoshi, interrupt their steamy moment. If you made it this far, comment which girl you think is the hottest in Shido's harem. Don't forget to leave a like and turn on post notifications after subscribing if you want to see more videos like this.